sort of critical friend to those lessons is I want to share where I'm coming from personally on this. Some of the people here in the room have been hearing me wrestle with these thoughts the last couple of days. But I do want you to be able to take or leave this based on where it's coming from. You already heard how we're developing these studies by studying classrooms around the world and by crowdsourcing those studies. That's very important, I think, to what I'm going to share with you. But I also want to share, at least personally, why I'm obsessing about this question that this webinar is about. You know, I have 3 kids at home. Ella, Jeremiah, and Clara, whom I love dearly, and I'm thinking a lot these days about the world that they're inheriting from the rest of us. And if you're like me, the news is hard, right? We face, in our communities, in our countries, and as a globe, we face just enormous challenges together. Whether it is the environment, like Greta was marching for, whether it is growing intolerance and kind of a shrinking back, like narrowing the notion of who is we, happening in my country, it's happening in your country, it's happening around the world. Whether we think about global health, terrorism, there are all these challenges that we humanity have got to take on. And yet, the more I travel around the world to classrooms and schools, the more I come to understand that most children are being educated in systems that were designed for different children. So many, including, I would argue in the Indian context, has an education system that was imposed on its culture and context. All the implications of that are hard to see, but the idea that we are all using classrooms that are sort of built on a model, some of you probably know this history, like it's kind of wild. There's this classroom model built for an industrial age that was largely for boys of certain wealth, and that we're now all using it. Just makes me ask, how does that need to be reimagined to actually fit the children and their contexts, right? Certainly those classrooms and schools were built before we had the uncertain future that we have now. The economy is changing. What jobs will be are changing. What it means to have a job is changing. And in many cases, personally, what I'm seeing is that some of those structures, like how we define classroom, how we think about teaching and learning, it's actually perpetuating divisions among people. It's perpetuating divisions of opportunity and power and privilege among people. Not to mention, the more I learn about the science of learning development, I mean, I'm sure there's people on this call that know more than I do. The last 10 years, we've learned more about how the mind works, really, than we did in all of human history before that. The idea that we have classrooms and schools that were built before that information and are not informed by what we're learning about how the human mind actually works, it seems absurd. So I'm fired up about this because the more I see the mismatch between our inherited models of classrooms and schools and what students, who they are and what they actually need, the more I think we have got to reimagine these. And the more I think the way to reimagine this is to involve students in reimagining their own education. Like, student leadership has to be the answer. And I do what I do because I believe learning from all of these classrooms around the world and all of these people trying and failing, like the natural laboratory of Teach for All, is, I think, enormously important, because we can learn from Pooja and her students, and we can learn from students like Rehan, and we can bring those together in conversations like this and say, how are we going to do things differently? Let's learn from each other. And that's the spirit of where this is all coming from.